You know, it's funny. The majority of people in the West, when they first got into Dragon Ball, it was through Dragon Ball Z, either on syndication or on Toonami, or maybe one of the home releases. And of course, you have the crowd that got into the show via the video games. But no matter which way you got in, the majority of fans in the West became familiar, or should I say acclimated, with the adult version of Son Goku. Son Goku, as an adult, was the star of Dragon Ball Z. Same thing with Gohan and of course Vegeta. Other characters like Piccolo and Trunks round out the cast. But in Japan, they were exposed to Dragon Ball first. And because of that, it was the kid version of Goku that had gotten such high ratings on television and sold so many manga copies that the Japanese were acclimated to Kid Goku. So when Son Goku grew up in the series, it came as a bit of a shock to a lot of Japanese fans. One thing you should understand is that because Dragon Ball aired first, it wasn't just that they were used to Goku, but also historically, a lot of manga protagonists don't grow up if they're kids. But in Dragon Ball, Toriyama took the risk of aging up Son Goku, which was actually at the behest of his editor, Torishima, at the time. Torishima was a mentor to Toriyama, but Toriyama didn't always listen. But in this case, he did. And the Goku that we have here, who's grown up, full-bodied, is the one that we all kind of know. But there's a lot more to Goku's literal growth that a lot of fans don't know. When he first appeared as an adult, there were tons, and I mean tons, of secret symbolism, Buddhist and Taoist inspired references, and it was a huge turning point for the series because now the series adopted the action style a bit more than the comedy style, and thus Dragon Ball would change forever. On this edition of Dragon Ball In Depth, I want to look at the first time Goku grew up, what it means, what it meant at the time, and why it's important. Trust me, this will be an underrated video, but I promise you by the end of it, you will learn something. Or at least if you didn't, then you're pretty damn knowledgeable about Eastern philosophy. And if you did, well, I really hope you enjoy this. Let's get to it now. Right now, back in stock is the Son Goku Super Mario Bros. 3 Vintage Fusion merchandise on the Geekdom 101 store. It comes in various styles, sizes, and colors, and it's probably one of my favorite shirt designs of all time. Limited edition, but back in stock now. Go pick yours up today. The link is in the description. Dragon Ball began as a gag manga. And although we all know Toriyama for being one of the most creative artists ever and having some of the most epic fight scenes in all of comics, the dude started off as being a comedian, not just with Dr. Slump, but also other one-shot manga he produced before Dragon Ball. And when Dragon Ball first began, there was a lot of action, lots of kung fu, but there was also a lot of comedy. But as the series progressed, there were a couple of times where there were tonal shifts, and it got a little bit more serious. To me, the most important tonal shift in the series was probably during the Demon King Piccolo arc, which began with Goku witnessing the death of, well, he didn't witness it, but he saw the body of his best friend Kuririn at the hands of Piccolo Daimao. That is a hell of a way to begin an arc. And by this point, it felt like Toriyama was really adopting the action side of his writing more than the comedy. There was always comedy, and Dragon Ball was never meant to be taken too seriously. And a lot of fans take it a lot more seriously than they should. And sometimes I've been accused of that. And I could see why somebody would think that, but ultimately, Dragon Ball is just a wacky story with a bunch of wacky characters that come together and have these wacky fights, but it's a lot of fun. We should try to have fun while watching or reading Dragon Ball. If you agree, leave a comment down below and leave a like on this video right now. Leave a like right now anyways, bro. It helps me out. Anyways, back to the video. So, when the tonal shift happened, Toriyama came to a decision to grow Goku and make him into an adult. So there was a time period after Goku defeated Demon King Piccolo and before the beginning of the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai where Toriyama chose to age up Goku and make him older and make him pretty much an adult. Based on the timeline when Goku first appeared in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai Arc, he was 18 years old. However, you have to remember, he also spent a year in the Room of Spirit and Time, which we found out deeper into Dragon Ball Z. We didn't even know what that was back then. But either way, the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai is a great arc. It's my favorite arc in Dragon Ball because it really becomes a coming-of-age story for Goku. Goku goes from being this monkey boy alone, trying to find his grandfather's heirloom, the Dragon Ball, meeting Bulma and beginning his adventure, to saving the world from Demon King Piccolo. And then in the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, he grows up, he finds his wife and ends up marrying her shortly after the big fight, and ends up finally, after failing 2 previous times, becoming the champion of the world by defeating Piccolo. It really is a perfect way to end Dragon Ball, and had Dragon Ball ended there, it would have been a very satisfying story, but Toriyama chose to continue and tell the story of Goku's child Gohan alongside Goku himself, and that would of course become Dragon Ball Z. If we go back and look at Goku's initial growth, there is so much there to digest, and I don't think people really realize how important that moment was for the future of this series. Let's go back to 1988. Open up your manga to Dragon Ball Chapter 166, or if you're watching the anime, and in this case I do prefer the anime version, check out Dragon Ball Episode 133. This begins the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai Arc, my favorite arc in Dragon Ball, and scored an 18.2 rating average. This first episode scored a 19% rating share. For reference, that's a hell of a lot more than Super, but Dragon Ball was red hot in the 80s and 90s. At this point, 3 years had passed since we had last seen Goku, and this is Goku's third shot at becoming champion in the Tenkaichi Budokai. I can only imagine how much of a culture shock it was for the Japanese when they first see Goku as a fully grown adult. It was a huge deal in Japan. In fact, Masako Nozawa herself, the voice of Son Goku for the anime, has stated that she's one of the only actresses who was selected to reprise her role as adult Goku versus kid Goku, which is really rare because usually in Japan when somebody grows up, they are recast. But Nozawa was so talented and so respected by Toriyama, she was allowed to keep voicing Goku. And what I find interesting about that is that people always complain about Goku sounds like a girl, and it's almost always from somebody who grew up with the dub and has only seen small bits and pieces of the Japanese version and never watched the entire thing. If you watch the entirety of Dragon Ball from start to finish in Japanese, you will notice that Nozawa does change her voice for adult Goku. Her voice deepens, he sounds like the same guy but grown up. She does a great job. Granted, it's not as masculine as like a Sean Shamel or a Mario Castañeda, but it still has that innocence that the character of Son Goku represents. Because Goku, whether he's a kid or an adult, is always going to be pure of heart and innocent. Even though some don't think he is, in the original Dragon Ball, he certainly was. And Nozawa plays up on that while still deepening the voice slightly. Goku definitely went through puberty here. So this first part of this episode was outside the tournament grounds and it was raining. Now, why did Toriyama choose to have there be rain here? Have it be that dreary sort of look? Now, obviously, that could be done as foreshadowing the calm before the storm, because we're about to get one of the biggest battles in the history of the series very soon. But I think he did it on purpose so that Goku would have an umbrella. Now, why the umbrella? Well, you have to understand that, first of all, it's a traditional paper umbrella with bamboo, and it's called a wagasa, which is basically an oil paper umbrella. Now, the wagasa is a Chinese thing, and it was imported to Japan during the Heian Jidai, which was 794 AD to 1185 AD, the era of peace. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with Dragon Ball and the symbolism, and I'm going to get to that right now. So, an umbrella is meant to protect us from the rain and getting wet, right? But it also signifies to the Japanese reader. We won't see this as much as the Japanese because they understand this culture very much. It symbolizes that Goku has returned from his training with Kami-sama, aka God, because the Umbrella is made up of what's called kami, which is paper, which is a homonym with kami, the word God, and in the anime, it's colored. The color they chose for the umbrella is red. Now you might be wondering, what's the big deal with the color red? Well, again, this is all about Asian Eastern culture. The color red is said to be a magical color that protects against evil spirits and bad events. It's interesting though, because red in Western culture represents evil or sinister motives or even Satan in the Bible. I don't know how that happened, but that's just the way it is. But in Eastern philosophy and religion, it's a totally different meaning. Toriyama chose to dress Goku up very similar, not identical, but very similar to a Mongolian nomad with a Persian headdress. Now you have to remember that Mr. Popo, and this is a video for another day, but Mr. Popo was heavily inspired by Persian mythology. The genie, the flying carpet, it all comes from Arabian Nights. And so this mirrors the fact that Goku trained with Mr. Popo. And also I think Toriyama did it so that when he finally does take off the headdress, we see the familiar Goku hairstyle, the iconic Goku hairstyle, and that's how we know for sure that it's him. It made for a nice reveal. The costume, though, is mostly Mongolian, and some have speculated that Toriyama got this idea from watching a classic kung fu film, because also the Mongolians inspired Western Chinese clothing as well. Once Goku reveals his face and his hair, everyone is shocked to see him all grown up, and he thinks that everybody else shrunk, and it was a kind of a funny line when he says he thinks that everybody shrunk. And then of course he looks at Bulma's lipstick and thinks she's bleeding because it's Goku. He doesn't know any better. He's still that innocent boy inside of a man's body, which is really symbolic here just in the introduction of adult Goku. As I mentioned earlier, in the 80s and 90s, it was unheard of for a shonen manga's protagonist to grow older. They just stayed kids forever, or until the story ended. I mentioned Torishima earlier about how he didn't really agree with Toriyama's vision, and if you look at what he said in a 2014 interview, he states the following. He says, "Following the appearance of Piccolo Daimao, the fights in Dragon Ball had become a lot more tense. To show that, Toriyama-san needed to reference anatomical charts and draw the muscle moving in more detail, like how when they tense up to muster up their auras, you can see their muscles swelling up. He had to use the character's muscles to express such a tense atmosphere, but he couldn't draw muscles properly with the head making up a third of the height." He goes on to say, "By drawing him with a 7:1 body-to-head ratio, the presentation of the fights would also become more realistic. And when he told me that, I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense." So that basically means that one of the key reasons to why Toriyama aged Goku was to have the fights make more sense. Two grown adults, not just a little kid fighting a grown person, like we had seen not only in the Piccolo arc, but also in the Red Ribbon arc, when Goku's taking on Red Ribbon guys and he's like half their height. This is a different pace, a different meaning, a different really feel and tone of his own manga. And I don't know if you guys know this, but when Toriyama first aged up Goku for the 22nd tournament, when he became 15 years old, he almost quit. Toriyama literally threatened to quit if they wouldn't let him do this. Now, Torishima kind of understands a bit more. Both of them were nervous about what the reaction would be from the audience, but it turns out that Goku growing up was well received, not only in the East, but everywhere else as well. The fact remains that characters changing on the outside is symbolic of them changing on the inside first, and Toriyama chose to do this to illustrate that Goku's certainly grown after training with God. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed it.